The Price of Vengeance, a story by E.B.'s Heart. Shola was reading bedtime stories to his would-be stepson Andrew, when the 5-year-old boy shouted, "Oh, Daddy is here," and smiled. Shola smiled back thinking Andrew was referring to him. But when he saw where Andrew was pointing, he had goosebump all over him and asked, "Is anyone there?" Andrew smiled and wanted to get out of the bed to meet his father. Shola ran out of the room panting. He wanted to appear calm so as not embarrass himself. He quietly walked to the parlor and said, "Andrew is asleep now." Helen, his fiancée, and Andrew's mother hugged him and said, "You will make a great dad. I am happy both of you are getting along now." Shola left the next morning still feeling like someone was watching him. He told his friend his experience, but his friend laughed at him and said, "You cannot take the words of a 5-year-old boy who still misses his father seriously." They both laughed over it and Shola continued his plans to marry Helen. Few days to their wedding, Shola spent the night again with Helen and her son. He tried to avoid putting Andrew to bed but Helen insisted, this would make your bond with him stronger. When Shola was reading the bedtime story, Andrew started laughing and pointing at a corner again. This time the imaginary daddy banged the wall-drop door so hard. Shola ran out panting. What is going on? Is there really someone there? How do I say this without sounding stupid? After a while, he went to Helen's room and saw her reading. He was about to ask her more about her late husband when Helen started kissing him. He forgot about it and thought it was not so important. Their wedding was attended by Shola's family and Helen's 2 mysterious friends. Shola's mother was pissed that Helen's family were not present, but Shola stood his ground. "She is not in good terms with her family for marrying me, and I will not abandon her. And she said she went through hell in the hands of her former husband's family and doesn't want to talk about them," Shola said in defense for Helen. However, 2 months after their wedding, Shola came home from work and saw something surprising. He had wanted to surprise Helen with a lunch date. But when he got home, he heard chatting and laughter in their bedroom. He tiptoed upstairs to Helen's room where the noise was coming from. He saw Helen and Andrew playing and laughing. He was surprised because he thought Andrew should be in school since he was preparing to leave for school when Shola was also leaving for work. What Shola was yet to find out was that Andrew was a ghost. He died 3 years ago at 5 years old in the hands of his biological father. Andrew was just a spirit in a bottle conjured by his grieving mother to cope for her loss. And Shola just walked into the darkest revenge by a scorned woman. Helen only married him to offer him to her sorcerer for her son's conjured spirit to keep existing. Because she was told it was a soul for a soul. When Helen gave birth to Andrew after 2 years of trying to conceive, her late husband, Walter, loved Andrew so much. The hatred began when Andrew turned 2 years old and was yet to hold his neck, talk, or walk. Walter, his father, started despising him. In fact, he hated him so much. He tried severally to convince Helen to kill him, so that they can move on with their lives, but Helen refused. Apart from the fact that Helen lost her womb due to the complication that led to Andrew being a special needs child. She loves her child so much and the thought of harming him drove her mad. This caused serious fight between them all the time. Then one day, Helen came home from the market and saw Andrew dead. Walter strangled him to death and was trying to convince Helen to accept what had happened. "We cannot keep spending money on a child that will never get better," Walter shouted at her angrily. Seeing her child lifeless touched the darkest part of Helen's soul. She did not utter a word to Walter, she simply dressed up and left. Walter did everything possible to stop her from leaving. He thought Helen was going to call the police, but far from it, she was going to do worse. Walter was worried sick and sleeping in the same house with his dead son for 3 days, waiting for Helen to return. This made him so mad. Then on the midnight of the 3rd day, Helen walked into their home while Walter was asleep with a very powerful sorcerer. The sorcerer began the ritual Helen had called her for. By the time Walter woke up, he realized that he could not move. The sorcerer invoked his spirit and boxed it as Helen had demanded. The sorcerer also called back Andrew's spirit back into his body and made him healthier. But the only thing about Andrew was that he cannot grow up and he only exists within their home. If he goes outside, he was just a smoke and nothing more. And Helen made a pact with the sorcerer to be submitting a soul in form of a father figure or a male friend every now and then to keep Andrew from vanishing. Walter was seeing his body, but could not do anything. I want him to watch as I take my revenge on anything walking, breathing and looking like a man. That was why Shola was in serious danger, because Helen only married him to use his soul and buy more time for her son. Shola was still thinking about what was happening when Helen called him from behind. He turned to face Helen, but she touched him with a staff and whispered, "Sleep, Shola, sleep." Shola found himself awake but not moving. She called out his spirit and locked it away. She touched his body with the same staff and it disappeared. Shola's spirit started floating in the house, just like Walter's own. He looked around and saw Walter crying by the corner. He quickly rushed to him and said, "I saw your picture. Are you Andrew's father?" Walter looked at him with pity and said, "I tried to warn you. But you were too in love to notice. She is out to take revenge on men for my mistake. How can grief make her to kill two men? She is not done yet. And men will always follow a beautiful woman, even when they see a clear danger." Few hours later, Shola's office called. They saw Shola's body in his office toilet. He was dead. The doctors said it was heart attack. Helen mourned Shola so much. Everyone pitied her. Poor woman, how will she cope now after losing two husbands within a few years? Some accused her of killing them, while others believed she was just unlucky. Right inside her home were the spirits of the two men, hovering around, confused and sad. Helen also targets rich men, so that when they die, their wealth becomes hers and that pushes her higher in social status. So being beautiful and rich was her flashpoints. And a lot of men love her kind of woman. Few months after Shola's death, she met Obinna. Obinna was a tech genius and an only son of his parents. He fell in love with Helen, not just because she was beautiful, but she equally loaded with cash and properties. On their third date, Helen told Obinna that she was a widow. "I lost my husband in a car accident, she said, pretending to cry. Obinna felt really sorry for her and promised to always be there for her. In fact, his love for even increased. Then he asked, "Do you have a child?" Helen frowned, but pretended to be soft and answered yes, I have a son. Her response made Obinna to instantly withdraw. "I cannot marry any woman with a child," Obinna thought to himself while plastering a fake smile on his face. "If only he sleeps with me," Helen also thought, smiling. The sorcerer made it in a way that once any man sleeps with Helen, then she can have access to their soul and take their life. So when Obinna was planning to simply use Helen and dump her, Helen was also thinking of using him to extend her son's life. Even though marrying them gives her financial security, she would not mind taking only the soul. "Can I meet your child?" Obinna asked, smiling and still pretending. Helen took him to her house. Andrew ran to hug Obinna and said, "Welcome, Daddy." Obinna didn't like that, but still had to pretend. After spending an hour there, he left and drove straight to his friend's place to tell him he just got a cheap catch. "A desperate widow looking for who to keep her warm," Obinna said and laughed dryly. They both laughed and discussed how they would take turns with her. Obinna started first. He promised her marriage and started sleeping with her. In his first sleepover, Helen told him to put her son to sleep as usual. He did not like it, but did it anyway. On his second sleepover, he visited his friend Eric and left to Helen's place from his house. When he got to Helen's house, Helen asked him his plans on their relationship. She wanted to know if they will go far so that she can just take his soul. But Obinna's response simply confirmed her thought. He only wanted to play and dump her. So she brought out her staff and touched his face. Obinna saw his body lying lifeless and his spirit watching Helen with two other men, Walter and Shola. "Am I dead?" Obinna said repeatedly. "What did she do to me? Who is she?" All his questions made Walter and Shola to turn to him. "Yes, you are dead, your body will be found soon." Helen returns their bodies to the last place they were before coming to her house. Unknown to her, the last place Obinna was at Eric's place, and Eric was still sitting in the couch where Obinna sat when he was there, watching football with two of his neighbors. They all screamed in fear when Obinna's corpse suddenly appeared on the same couch they were sitting. Eric and his neighbors screamed and tried to run away. But when Eric noticed Obinna was black as if he was long dead, he begged his friends to call the police while he recorded Obinna. The police arrived in the morning and arrested Eric and his neighbors. No one believed their story, but Eric kept saying that Obinna visited a certain widow he just met and that whatever that happened must come from there. The police shut him up, but later decided to visit Helen and see if there would be more explanation to what they were looking for. When they got to Helen's house, she angrily welcomed them and refused to talk. She agreed knowing Obinna, but that was it. The police felt she was lying and told her to follow them for questioning. She agreed, but as they were leaving, the police officer asked Andrew to come along, saying a little boy like him should not left alone at home. Helen refused and insisted he can manage. The police officers said no, you may stay longer than you think with us, so he can come along. She started shouting no, no, leave him alone. The police officers started looking at them suspiciously. They felt Helen was hiding her son from someone. They dragged Helen, who was screaming and shouting, to their car. Bring the boy, one of them commanded. Andrew also refused to follow them. One of the officers simply carried him outside, and the moment they stepped outside, he vanished. The officers ran as fast as they could to a distance. What was that? One of the officers asked. Helen cried so loudly. When the officers got to the station, they asked Helen to explain what happened, but she refused to talk. After much interrogation, they released Helen on the grounds of insanity, and for not having any evidence linking her to Obinna's death. Helen got home and wept bitterly. She has finally lost her son, but she has not forgiven men. She blamed any man that came around her for her woes. She blamed herself. She blamed the world for being cruel to her and her child. She woke up one morning and moved to another state, far away from where she was living. She has money to spend, so she rented another apartment and moved in as a single young woman. Her aim was to kill any man that comes her way, especially those one that wants to use and dump her. The same week she moved into her new compound, her neighbor, a married man with 2 children, started following her about. The first night she slept in a hotel with HM, Helen slipped a harsh substance into his drink. And he died that same night in his sleep. She continued taking the life of any man she dated. Until she met Matt. Matt was a single man who was into cannibalism. He buys and sells human meat to the rich who prefer human meat to the normal beef and chicken. When Matt learnt that Helen does not have a family, he felt she was an easy target. Helen, who was not afraid of visiting any man because she thought she was the danger, visited Matt one evening. She was sipping her drink, waiting for Matt to join her so that she will put her usual substance in his drink. But she saw herself feeling dizzy and falling asleep. She woke up hours later in a big drum filled with semi-lifeless people. She opened her eyes and saw how Matt and another man were cutting their prey into small pieces. Helen cried and begged God for another chance. This is where unforgiveness has landed me, she thought to herself, shedding hot tears. I killed a lot of men to get back at my husband, and I still didn't get the closure I needed so badly. Now look at where vengeance has landed me. She was still talking when Matt ordered the man to bring her, while pointing towards Helen. The man came closer and took the lady beside her. When they removed the lady, Helen saw a chance to raise her head a little more. She raised her head and saw coolers of fresh meat. I cannot end like this, she cried softly. She noticed that the other people were dead and wondered how she was still alive. If I ever survive this, I will go straight home and release my husband's spirit that is trapped in our home. I forgive him, I forgive men. She was still thinking when Matt got a call that their big customer was around. Immediately Matt and the man left, Helen got out of the shallow drum and tried to walk, but fell. She tried to open the door, which was obviously not locked, but saw a man with a gun standing on the door. She noticed the house was in the middle of the bush. She was still walking about trying to find a way when a man amongst the captives got up. "Where are we?" he asked Helen. Helen became startled and fell, making a loud noise which attracted the security man outside. She was too weak to fight and the man was shot on the spot. Helen was beaten up so bad and she collapsed. She woke up again and saw heaps of bodies on her. "How am I still alive?" Helen wondered. She got up to run. That was when she realized they had cut off her right hand. She felt so dizzy from blood loss. Helen managed to walk out of the house and ran as fast as she could until she got to the road and collapsed. How she made it to the hospital was still a miracle. A man picked her up and took her to the hospital. Helen spent 1 month in the hospital and the strange man who brought her to the hospital took care of the bills. The day she got home, she laid on the floor and wept for 1 hour. After crying, she pleaded with Walter to forgive her for being so blinded with rage. She went back to the sorcerer and asked her to release the spirits of the men she killed and trapped in her home. After that, Helen adopted a child and dedicated her life to helping women who have been hurt like her, and who have ever lost a child. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, but be careful not to burn yourself on your way to vengeance. When you forgive someone, you are actually doing yourself a favor. So try and free yourself by forgiving those that wronged you.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.